I did not find a Christmas tree when I walked through the door. I found my grandfather turning cold. The note on the counter claimed my parents were on a cruise, but the thermostat history told a different story. Grandpa could not call for help because someone had cut every way out. Then he whispered one line that changed everything regarding what my grandmother left me. The real revenge was not violence. It was paperwork that hit like a guillotine. My name is Kylie Hughes, and I am 36 years old. I have spent the last decade of my life investigating insurance fraud, digging through paper trails to find the one lie that brings a house of cards down. I am good at it because I know how to look at a disaster and see the blueprint of intent. But as I drove my sedan through the winding, snow-packed roads of Holleridge on December 24th, I was not an investigator. I was just a tired daughter hoping that, for once, the holiday truce would hold. The heater in my car was blasting at full strength, fighting against the temperature outside which had dropped to single digits. My phone sat in the cup holder, silent. There had been no text from my mother, Diane, asking when I would arrive. There had been no calls from my father, Mark, reminding me to pick up ice or wine. Just silence. I told myself that perhaps they were busy with the turkey, or perhaps they were actually spending time with Grandpa Harold. I clung to that hope. I needed the house to be warm. I needed the smell of cinnamon and pine. I needed to see Grandpa Harold sitting in his armchair, perhaps a bit frailer than the last time I visited, but safe. I turned the final corner onto Elm Street, and the dread hit me before the car even came to a stop. Every house on the block was a riot of color. The neighbors to the left had inflatable reindeer on the lawn. The house to the right was draped in icicle lights. But my parents' house, the house my grandfather had built with his own hands 50 years ago, was a black void. There were no lights in the windows, no wreath on the door, no smoke rising from the chimney. It looked like a gap in a smile, a dark, missing tooth in the bright neighborhood. I parked the car, the engine cutting off with a shudder. The silence of the street felt heavy. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The wind bit through my wool coat immediately, sharp and cruel. I hurried up the walkway, my boots crunching on unsalted ice. Why hadn't Dad salted the walk? He was obsessive about liability. I reached for my keys, my metal ring jangling in the quiet. But when I pushed the key toward the lock, the door drifted open. It was unlocked. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. My voice died in the entryway. There was no smell of roasting turkey. There was no scent of pine or wood smoke. There was only the smell of stagnant, frigid air. It was colder inside the house than it was in my car. I fumbled for the light switch in the hall. Nothing happened. I flipped it up and down. Dead. Panic began to rise in my throat. A cold, hard lump. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar foyer. It was stripped bare. The rug was gone. The family photos that usually lined the staircase were missing, leaving rectangular ghosts of dust on the wallpaper. I walked toward the kitchen, my breath pluming in the air in front of me. That was physically impossible in a lived-in house, unless the heat had been off for days. "Grandpa?" I shouted, louder this time. I reached the kitchen island. The marble countertop was bare except for a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It was held down by a ceramic salt shaker. I shone my light on it. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. It was small, cramped, and terrified of taking up too much space. Yet the message was massive in its indifference. "We went on a cruise. You handle Grandpa." I stared at the words. "We went on a cruise. On Christmas Eve? Without telling me? And leaving a 90-year-old man alone in a house with no power?" A sound coming from the back of the house shattered my paralysis. It was a low, guttural moan. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap, exhausted and near the end. "Grandpa!" I screamed. Dropping the note, I ran toward the living room. The layout of the house was etched into my memory, but the darkness made it feel foreign, like a labyrinth. I swept the flashlight beam across the room. The furniture was pushed against the walls, covered in drop cloths, as if the house was being prepped for painting. "Grandpa, answer me!" Another moan. It came from the sunroom, the small addition off the back where Grandma Evelyn used to grow her orchids. It was the coldest room in the house, mostly glass, with poor insulation. I sprinted to the French doors and threw them open. The beam of my flashlight hit the corner, and my knees almost gave out. Grandpa Harold was curled into a fetal ball on an old stained mattress that had been dragged onto the floor. He was not wearing his heavy wool sweaters. He was in a thin cotton undershirt and pajama bottoms that looked soiled. "Oh God, Grandpa." I dropped to my knees beside him. The cold radiating off him hit me in a wave. I touched his cheek, and it felt like touching a bag of frozen peas. His skin was waxy and pale, his lips a terrifying shade of violet. He was shaking, not the normal shivering of someone who is chilly, but the violent, bone-rattling tremors of a body shutting down. His eyes were rolled back, showing the whites. "I am here, Grandpa. It is Kylie. I am here," I said, my voice cracking. I grabbed his hands. They were stiff, the fingers curled into claws. I started rubbing them, trying to generate friction, trying to push life back into them. "Phone," I muttered. "I need a phone." I looked around the room. The side table where his rotary phone used to sit was empty. I looked for the space heater that was always in this room. The outlet was bare. They had stripped the room. I yanked my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. My fingers were trembling so hard, I almost dropped the device. "Emergency services. What is your location?" the dispatcher asked. 12 Oak Street, Hollow Ridge. I have an elderly male, 90 years old. Severe hypothermia. He is non-responsive but breathing. The house is freezing. Send everything you have. Paramedics are dispatched. Ma'am, is he conscious? Barely, I choked out. He is shaking violently. Get him warm, ma'am. Do not rub his skin too hard. It might damage the tissue. Just use body heat and blankets. There are no blankets, I yelled at the operator. The realization hitting me. I scanned the room again with my light. The room was empty. No quilt, no Afghan, nothing. I tore off my heavy wool coat and wrapped it around him, tucking the edges under his shivering frame. Then I lay down on the dirty mattress beside him, pulling his icy body against mine, trying to transfer whatever warmth I had into him. Grandpa, stay with me. Do not you dare leave me, I whispered into his ear. He smelled of old sweat and neglect. His breathing was shallow and jagged, like a rattle in a broken machine. Kai, lie? The sound was so faint I almost missed it. I am here. Grandpa, I am right here. Cold, he rasped. So, cold. I know. Help is coming. You just hold on. I looked around the dark room as we waited. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. I saw a water pitcher on the floor, tipped over and bone dry. I saw a plate with a hardened crust of something that looked like oatmeal, untouched and covered in a layer of dust. This was not an accident. This was not parents forgetting to pay a bill. My father, Mark, was an accountant. He tracked every penny. My mother, Diane, was obsessed with public perception. They did not accidentally leave an old man alone in a freezing house on Christmas. The sirens cut through the night air, getting louder. Hear that, Grandpa? That is the cavalry. You are going to be okay. He stopped shivering. That terrified me more than the shaking. Grandpa, stay awake, I shouted, slapping his cheek lightly. Grandpa! The front door banged open. Footsteps thundered down the hall. In here! We are in the back! I screamed. 3 EMTs burst into the room, their tactical lights flooding the space with blinding white illumination. Step back, ma'am. Let us work, the lead paramedic said. He was a large man with a calm, commanding voice. I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They moved with practiced efficiency. Scissors cut through Grandpa's undershirt. Monitors were slapped onto his chest. A thermal thermometer was placed in his ear. The medic looked at the reading and froze for a split second. He looked at his partner. Core temp is 84 degrees. We are in the danger zone. Let's get the heated blankets and the IV fluids warmed up. Now, move. 84 degrees. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. Is he Is he going to make it? I asked. The medic didn't look at me. He was busy intubating Grandpa, whose breathing had become too shallow. We are doing everything we can. Is there any medical history we need to know? Diabetes? Heart condition? He has mild hypertension. That is it. He was healthy, I said, the past tense tasting like ash in my mouth. He was fine 3 weeks ago when I talked to him. Let's move him. On 3? 1, 2, 3. They lifted his frail body onto the stretcher. He looked so small, like a child lost in the bedding. I followed them out of the house. As I stepped onto the porch, I looked back one last time. The flashlight from one of the medics swept across the kitchen counter, illuminating that note again. You handle Grandpa. Rage. Hot and blinding. Replace the fear. I am riding with him, I told the driver. Jump in the front, he said. The ride to Lakeview County Medical Center was a blur of lights and static from the radio. I stared out the windshield, watching the snow fall. But my mind was back in that house. I was cataloging everything I had seen. The missing phone, the dry pitcher, the locked thermostat box I had caught a glimpse of in the hall. A clear plastic guard with a padlock on it. Who locks a thermostat? Who takes the blankets? We arrived at the emergency room bay, and the doors flew open. A team of doctors and nurses swarmed the stretcher, shouting numbers and medical shorthand that I recognized from my claim files but never thought I would hear applied to my own blood. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, look at the skin turgor, possible sepsis. Get a line in. I was pushed to the side, left to stand in the sterile hallway while they wheeled him into a trauma room. The curtain was ripped shut, but I could see the shadows moving frantically behind it. I sank into a plastic chair, my hands still smelling like the dust from the mattress. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. I watched a clock on the wall tick. 11:45. It was almost Christmas morning. A doctor stepped out of the room. She looked tired, her face grim. She pulled her mask down. Ms. Hughes? I stood up. Yes. Is he? He is stable. For now, she said. We have started the rewarming process. It has to be slow to avoid shocking the heart, but I need to be honest with you. This level of hypothermia, combined with the dehydration, his kidneys have taken a hit. We are not out of the woods. Can I see him? For a moment, he is conscious, which is a miracle, but he is very weak. She hesitated, looking at her clipboard. Ms. Hughes, I have to ask, how long was he alone in that house? I found a note, I said, my voice steady now. My parents left for a cruise. I do not know when they left. The doctor's expression hardened. She nodded once. I see. Go in. I walked into the trauma room. It was warm, heated by overhead lamps. Grandpa was buried under layers of heated blankets. Tubes ran into his arms. A monitor beeped a steady, slow rhythm. His eyes were open. They were milky and tired, but they focused on me. Hi, Grandpa, I whispered, taking his hand. It was warmer now, but still felt fragile. He tried to speak. His throat clicked. Water, I said, reaching for a sponge stick on the tray. I dabbed his lips. He swallowed painfully. He squeezed my hand. It was a weak grip, but it was there. Kylie, he breathed. I am here. You are safe at the hospital. He shook his head slightly. The movement seemed to cost him everything. He started, his voice a dry rasp. They locked it. The thermostat? I asked gently. He blinked. Phone, food, said, too expensive. Tears pricked my eyes. My parents, who drove luxury cars and went on cruises, told him food was too expensive. Rest, Grandpa. We will talk later. No, he whispered. The urgency in his voice spiked the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. He pulled me closer. I leaned down, my ear inches from his mouth. They don't know about... He stopped, gasping for air. Don't know about what? Your grandma, he whispered. The papers. I frowned. What papers? Left you, he wheezed. Left you. Everything. His eyes rolled back slightly, exhausted by the effort. They don't know. His hand went limp in mine, though the monitor showed he was still sleeping, just unconscious from the sheer toll on his body. I stood there for a long time, staring at his face. My grandmother, Evelyn, had died 4 years ago. The family narrative, the one Mark and Diane had told everyone, was that she had left the house and the savings to them, to care for Grandpa. They had always claimed it was a burden they were graciously accepting. They don't know what your grandma left you. If Grandpa was telling the truth, then the last 4 years had been a lie. And if there were papers my parents didn't know about, that meant they had been operating on assumptions. Arrogant, greedy assumptions. I looked at the clock. 12:01. Merry Christmas. I let go of Grandpa's hand and walked out of the trauma room. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. In their place was the cold, clinical detachment I used when I looked at a fraudulent claim file. I was not a grieving granddaughter anymore. I was an investigator at a crime scene. My parents were on a ship somewhere in the Caribbean, sipping cocktails, thinking they had solved their problem by leaving him to freeze. They thought they had scrubbed the timeline. They thought no one would check the details. They were wrong. I walked to the nurse's station. I am going to get coffee. I lied to the nurse on duty. I will be back in 2 hours. I walked out of the hospital and into the biting cold of the parking lot. I got into my car and started the engine. I was not going to get coffee. I was going back to the house. I needed to get back there before the sun came up. I needed to document the thermostat history before it reset. I needed to photograph the empty refrigerator. I needed to find the lock on the thermostat box. I needed to find every single piece of paper in that house before Mark and Diane Hughes realized their plan had failed. The body in the house hadn't turned cold enough to die, but my heart? As I shifted the car into drive and turned back toward Holleridge, my heart was stone. Let them enjoy their cruise. When they got back, I would be waiting, and I would have the paperwork. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed with a frequency that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. I sat in a molded plastic chair that forced my spine into an unnatural curve, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum floor. My hands were still shaking. Just a little. The adrenaline crash leaving me hollowed out and nauseous. To the hospital staff, I was just another exhausted relative dealing with a holiday crisis. They saw a woman in a wrinkled sweater, hair pulled back in a messy knot, eyes red-rimmed and wide. They did not know who I was when I was not sitting in this chair. My name is Kylie Hughes. For the last 12 years, I have worked as a senior claims and compliance investigator for North Ark Mutual. My job is not exciting in the way television makes it look. I do not chase bad guys down alleys. I chase paper. I look at timelines that do not add up. I analyze metadata on photos that claim to be from a Tuesday when the shadows suggest a Friday. I look for the gap between what people say happened and what the data proves happened. I am paid to be suspicious. I am paid to know that when a story feels perfect, it is usually because someone rehearsed it, and sitting there, waiting for the doctor to come back, the investigator in me began to wake up. I replayed the last 6 months of phone calls in my head. This was why I had arrived so late on Christmas Eve. It was not just the workload at North Ark. Though the end-of-year compliance audits were brutal, it was the dread, the heavy, suffocating dread of interacting with my parents, Mark and Diane. Going home to Holleridge was never simple. My parents operated on a frequency of high-functioning dysfunction. They were the kind of people who would insult you with a smile and then ask why you were being so sensitive when you flinched. They were masters of control, specifically the control of information. Every time I called to speak to Grandpa Harold over the last few months, there was a gatekeeper. "He is sleeping. Kylie," my mother would say, her voice light and airy, as if she were doing me a favor. "He had a rough night. We do not want to wake him," or my father, Mark, would get on the line, his tone clipped and busy. "He is confused today. Kiddo, it is better if you do not upset him. He thinks it is 1974. Just let him be." I had believed them, That was the bitter pill sticking in my throat now. I had believed them because it was easier than confronting the alternative. I had believed them because I wanted to believe that they were actually taking care of him. When Grandma Evelyn died 4 years ago, my parents had moved into the main house with a speed that should have alarmed me. They sold their condo, claimed they were sacrificing their independence to care for Dad, and took over the master suite. Grandma Evelyn had been the sun that our family orbited around. She was warmth, flour on an apron, and a laugh that could fill the drafty hallways of that old Victorian house. Grandpa Harold was the quiet earth beneath her feet, steady, unshakable, kind. He had built that life for us. He had paid for my college when my parents claimed they were liquid assets poor. He had taught me how to drive. He had taught me that integrity was what you did when no one was watching. After Evelyn died, the light went out of the house, but Mark and Diane promised they would keep the fire burning. "We will look after him," Dad had said at the funeral, looking solemn in a suit that cost more than my first car. "It is the least we can do." I looked at my phone again. It sat on my knee, a black mirror reflecting the hospital ceiling. Still nothing, no missed calls. No texts asking if I had made it safely through the snowstorm. Just that one previous message from hours ago. "We went on a cruise. You handle Grandpa." The timestamp on that text was 10 in the morning. They had been gone for 14 hours before I arrived. 14 hours. And judging by the temperature in that house, the heat had been off for much longer than that. A door swished open down the hall, and the attending physician walked toward me. Dr. Eris Thorne. I had read his name tag earlier. He looked younger than me, but his eyes were old. He had the look of a man who had seen too many holidays ruined by negligence. I stood up, my knees cracking. "Ms. Hughes?" he asked. His voice was low, professional, but devoid of the reassuring warmth doctors usually try to project. He was holding a tablet. "How is he?" I asked. "Is he warm yet?" "We have his core temperature up to 92 degrees, Dr. Thorne said. "It is a slow process. If we go too fast, we risk cardiac arrhythmia. But the hypothermia is actually the secondary concern right now." My stomach dropped. "Secondary? What do you mean?" Dr. Thorne tapped the screen of his tablet. Looking at a chart, he did not look at me immediately. He let the silence hang there, heavy and accusatory. "Your grandfather is severely dehydrated. Kylie, his sodium levels are through the roof. This did not happen over one night, even if the heat went out yesterday. A well-hydrated man would not present like this. He has skin turgor issues that suggest he has not had a proper intake of fluids for at least 4 or 5 days, maybe a week." I felt the blood drain from my face. "A week?" "We also found early-stage decubitus ulcers on his hips and heels," the doctor continued, his voice flat. "Bed sores. They happen when a patient is left in one position for too long without being turned or moved. Does he have a caregiver? A visiting nurse?" "No," I whispered. My parents live with him. They are supposed to be caring for him." Dr. Thorne finally looked up, locking eyes with me. "Well, someone dropped the ball, hard. This is consistent with long-term neglect. He is 20 pounds underweight compared to his records from 6 months ago. We found traces of a sedative in his blood work, a benzodiazepine. Is he prescribed anything for anxiety or sleep?" "No," I said, my voice rising in panic. "He takes blood pressure medication and a multivitamin. That is it. He hates taking pills." "The toxicology screen isn't wrong," Dr. Thorne said. "He has been sedated, heavily. It explains why he didn't try to get up, why he didn't call for help before the cold set in. He was chemically knocked out." I leaned against the wall, the room spinning, sedated. My father, the accountant who complained about the cost of aspirin, had been drugging his own father? Why? To keep him quiet? To keep him from asking for food? To keep him in that back room so they didn't have to deal with him? "Ms. Hughes," the doctor said, softening his tone slightly but keeping his gaze intense. "I am a mandatory reporter. I have to flag this with Adult Protective Services. the social worker, Camille, is already drafting the paperwork. I need to know who the primary decision maker is for his medical care. Is it you? No, I choked out. It is my father, Mark Hughes. He has the power of attorney. Well, Dr. Thorne said, snapping the cover of his tablet shut. We are going to challenge that, because if he goes back to that environment, he will die. Tonight was a near miss. Another 6 hours, and you would have been planning a funeral, not a recovery. He turned to leave, then paused. He is asking for you again. You can sit with him. But Kylie? Yes. If those people walk through my doors, he said, gesturing to the ER entrance. You need to tell security, because I do not want them near my patient until the police have taken a statement. The police? I nodded, unable to speak. I walked back toward the trauma room, my legs feeling like they were moving through wet cement. You handle Grandpa. The note wasn't an instruction. It was a handover of a corpse. They thought he would be dead. I realized it then. With a clarity that cut through the exhaustion, the cruise, it wasn't a holiday. It was an alibi. They didn't just leave him. They timed it. They waited for the cold snap. They stopped the fluids. They dosed him with sedatives. They turned down the thermostat. And then they got on a boat where they could claim spotty cell service and zero liability. Oh, we had no idea the furnace broke. We were in the middle of the Atlantic. We are devastated. I could hear my mother's fake sobbing voice in my head. I could see my father shaking his head, playing the grieving son. I pushed the curtain aside and stepped back into the small, warm enclosure where Grandpa lay. He looked better than before, but only slightly. The violent shaking had stopped, replaced by a stillness that was almost as frightening. His skin was still gray, but his lips were no longer that terrifying shade of purple. I pulled the plastic chair right up to the rail of the bed. I reached out and took his left hand again. His hand, which used to be so strong, a carpenter's hand, capable of building a deck or fixing a delicate toy, was now just bones wrapped in papery skin. I stroked his knuckles, trying to soothe him, trying to soothe myself. That was when I felt it, or rather, felt the absence of it. My thumb brushed over his ring finger. For as long as I had been alive, for as long as my father had been alive, Harold Hughes had worn a thick, gold wedding band. It was a matching set with Grandma Evelyn's. He never took it off, even when he was working with power tools. He would tape over it rather than remove it. He used to say it was the only thing holding him to the earth. I looked down at his hand. The ring was gone. In its place was a deep, pale indentation where the gold had shielded his skin from the sun and dirt for 60 years. The skin around the mark was irritated, red and slightly scraped, as if the ring hadn't been slid off gently. It looked like it had been forced. I stared at that raw circle of skin. A wedding ring has no value to a man dying of hypothermia. It cannot buy warmth. It cannot buy water. But to Mark and Diane? It was gold. It was an asset. It was probably worth $300 at a pawn shop. Or maybe they just didn't want the undertaker to take it. They had stripped him. They had stripped the house of warmth, stripped his body of fluids, stripped his mind with drugs, and stripped his finger of the one symbol of love he had left. I took a picture of his hand with my phone. The shutter sound was loud in the quiet room. I looked at the photo, the evidence. They don't know, I whispered to the sleeping man. My grief finally hardened. It cooled and solidified into something sharp and dangerous. I was not sad anymore. I was North Ark Mutual's best investigator, and I had just opened a new case file. I pulled up my banking app. I checked my savings. I had enough. I pulled up my work email and drafted a message to my boss. Family emergency. Taking personal leave effective immediately. Will be remote but unavailable for field work. Then I opened the Notes app on my phone and started a new list. Item 1. Secure the house. Item 2. Secure the assets. Item 3. Destroy Mark and Diane Hughes. I held Grandpa's hand, careful not to touch the raw skin where his ring used to be. Sleep, Grandpa, I said softly. When you wake up, I promise you, the locks will be changed. I sat back and waited for the sun to rise. I had a busy morning ahead of me. The fluorescent hum of the hospital hallway seemed to vibrate against my teeth. It was 6 in the morning on Christmas Day. The festive world outside was waking up to stockings and cinnamon rolls, but inside the Lakeview County Medical Center, the atmosphere was sterile, smelling of antiseptic and stale coffee. I had not slept. I was running on a cocktail of caffeine and cold, hard rage. I was standing outside Grandpa's room, watching the nurses change his IV bag through the glass, when I heard the click of hard heels on the linoleum. The sound was purposeful, sharp, and fast. I turned to see a woman approaching me. She was wearing a navy blue blazer that looked like armor and holding a thick file folder against her chest. Her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled at her eyes, giving her a look of permanent, intense scrutiny. "Kylie Hughes?" she asked. It was not a question. It was a verification. "Yes," I said, straightening my spine. I knew this tone. It was the tone of someone who had a checklist and zero patience for ambiguity. "I am Camille Ward, Clinical Social Work and Adult Protective Services Liaison for the hospital." She did not offer a hand to shake. She just opened her folder. "Dr. Thorne briefed me on your grandfather's admission status. We need to talk, now." She pointed to a small, windowless consultation room across the hall. I followed her. The room contained a round table and 3 chairs that looked like they had been stolen from a kindergarten cafeteria. Camille sat down and uncapped a pen. She looked at me with eyes that were not unkind, but they were absolutely devoid of sentiment. She was a mechanic of broken families, and she was here to inspect the damage. "Let us be clear about why I am here," Camille said, her voice low and even. "Dr. Thorne flagged this as a case of severe neglect with possible intent to harm. That triggers a mandatory reporting protocol to the state. I am the first step in that protocol. Whatever you tell me right now goes into an official affidavit. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. My investigator brain clicked into gear. I stopped being the granddaughter. I became the witness. "Ask your questions." "Describe the environment where you found him," Camille said, pen hovering. I took a breath. I did not use emotional words. I used data. "I arrived at the residence at 12 Oak Street at approximately 10:30 last night. The exterior temperature was 8 degrees Fahrenheit. The interior of the house was unheated. There was no ambient warmth. I did not have a thermometer, but I could see my breath in the kitchen. The thermostat was set to 50 degrees, but the house felt colder, likely due to poor insulation and the duration of the shutoff." Camille was writing furiously. "And the patient?" "Found in the rear sunroom," I continued. "He was on a bare mattress, no linens, no blankets. He was wearing a thin cotton undershirt and soiled pajama bottoms. There was no potable water within his reach. There was a pitcher on the floor, but it was bone dry and had a layer of dust inside, suggesting it had not been filled in several days. There was no food, no phone." Camille stopped writing and looked up. "No phone? Is there a landline in the house?" "There is a jack," I said, "but the unit was missing. The table where it usually sits was empty. And his cell phone?" "He does not have one. He relies on the house line." Camille made a dark mark on her paper. "Isolation, removal of communication devices. That is a textbook escalation marker." She looked at me. "You mentioned a note." I nodded. "On the kitchen counter. It was from my mother. It stated they had gone on a cruise and that I was to, quote, handle Grandpa, unquote. It did not provide a return date, emergency contact numbers, or instructions for his medication. "Who manages his finances?" Camille asked the question like a sniper taking a shot. I froze. It was the question I had been avoiding for 4 years. "My father, Mark Hughes," I said, the shame burning in my chest. "He has power of attorney, or at least, he claims he does. When my grandmother died, he told the family that everything was signed over to him to manage the estate upkeep. He handles the pension checks and the Social Security deposits." "And you have seen this power of attorney document?" Camille asked. "No," I admitted. "I took his word for it. He is my father." Perpetrators of elder financial abuse are family members in nearly 60% of cases, Camille recited, as if reading from a brochure. It is rarely a stranger. It is usually the son or daughter who feels entitled to an early inheritance. She leaned forward. Ms. Hughes, if your father controls the money, and he controls the house, and he removed the phone, we are looking at a coordinated effort to erase your grandfather's autonomy. This is not just neglect. This is erasure. Before I could answer, a nurse poked her head into the room. He is awake. He is asking for Kylie, and he is agitated. Camille stood up immediately. I need to speak to him. If he is lucid, his testimony is the only thing that matters right now. We walked back to the room. Grandpa was propped up slightly on pillows. The color had returned to his face, a patchy red instead of the deathly gray from the night before. But he looked small, frail. When he saw me, he tried to reach out, but the IV lines held him back. Kylie, he croaked. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. I am here, Grandpa, I said, moving to his side. This is Camille. She is here to help us. Grandpa looked at Camille with suspicion. He had the old-school pride of a man who never wanted charity and never wanted the government in his business. I don't need a nursing home, he rasped, his eyes narrowing. I am not here to put you in a home. Mr. Hughes, Camille said, her voice softening just a fraction. I am here to find out why you were freezing in your own living room. Grandpa closed his eyes. He swallowed hard. It wasn't just last night. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. What do you mean, Grandpa? He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. Mark, he set the dial. Every night, lower and lower. The thermostat? Camille asked gently. 55, Grandpa whispered. He said 60 was too expensive. Said I didn't need it that warm. Said blankets were enough. But you didn't have blankets, Mr. Hughes, Camille pressed. They took them, he said. A tear leaked out of the corner of his eye and slid into his white hairline. Diane said I was soiling them. Said she was tired of washing. Said if I was cold, I should move around more. Keep the blood flowing. I covered my mouth with my hand. My mother, who posted inspirational quotes on social media about family values. She had taken the blankets from a 90-year-old man because she didn't want to do laundry. And the phone? Camille asked. Kylie couldn't find your phone. Grandpa let out a bitter, wheezing laugh. Phone's been gone. Months. Months? I repeated, my voice rising. But when I called, Dad said you were sleeping. He said you were in the garden. He stood right there, Grandpa said, pointing a shaking finger at the empty space in the room. He stood there and told me if I talked to you, I would just worry you. He said the bill was too high, long distance. He said cutting the line was for my own good, to save money for the house repairs. What house repairs? I asked. The house looks exactly the same as it did 4 years ago. Exactly, Grandpa whispered. Camille stepped back from the bed. She looked at me, and her expression was grim. Okay, she said. That is enough for now. Mr. Hughes, you rest. She motioned for me to follow her into the hallway again. She closed the door and turned to me, her face hard as stone. You have a major problem, Kylie. I know, I said. They are monsters. No, that is an emotional problem, Camille corrected. You have a legal problem. Your father has custody. He likely has a signed document that says he determines the residence and medical care of that man in there. Unless we have a court order suspending that power, when Harold is discharged, I have to release him to his primary caregiver. I stared at her. You would send him back there? To the people who tried to freeze him to death? I don't want to, Camille said. But the law is a machine. If your father shows up with a valid power of attorney and says, my father is coming home, and I refuse, he can sue the hospital for kidnapping. He can call the police and have you removed from the premises. He almost killed him, I hissed. Prove it, Camille said. Right now. It is your word against his. He will say the furnace broke. He will say the phone was lost by a confused old man. He will say the blankets were in the wash. Unless you have hard evidence, documents, bank statements, a paper trail that proves malicious intent, he wins. That is how the system works. She stepped closer to me. Your grandfather mentioned papers. Before he fell asleep last night, you told the doctor he said something about what your grandmother left you. Yes, I said. He said, they don't know what your grandma left you, and he mentioned a tin box. Then you need to find that box, Camille said intensely. If there is a will, or a trust, or a letter of intent from your grandmother that contradicts your father's authority, that is your weapon. But you need to find it before your parents get off that boat. They are in the Caribbean, I said. I have a few days. Do not count on it, Camille warned. People like that? They have a sixth sense for when they are losing control. If they check their home security cameras and see you there, or if a neighbor calls them, they will be on the first flight back. She checked her watch. I can keep him here for 3 days on a medical hold, maybe 4 if I push the dehydration angle. After that, he is medically cleared for discharge. You have 96 hours to find a legal reason why he cannot go back to Mark Hughes. What if I take him to my place? I asked. I live 4 hours away. That is kidnapping, Camille said bluntly. Technically. Until you have guardianship, you cannot move him across county lines without the guardian's consent. You need to file for emergency temporary guardianship, and to get that, you need evidence that the current guardian is unfit. She handed me a card. Go back to the house. Do not confront your parents if they call. Do not tip your hand. Just get the evidence. If you find financial records, photograph them. If you find that box, take it. And for God's sake, change the locks if you can. But do it quietly. Can I hire a lawyer? You better, Camille said. And get a mean one. You do not want a family mediator. You want a litigator. I looked back through the glass at Grandpa. He was staring at the ceiling, his lips moving silently. He was probably praying. Or maybe he was counting the money he thought he was costing me. 96 hours. That was 4 days. I had 4 days to dismantle my parents' entire life. One more thing, Camille said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The hospital social worker isn't supposed to tell you this, but if you find cash in that house, or valuables that belong to your grandfather, secure them. If your parents realize the game is up, they will liquidate everything they can touch. Don't let them. I nodded. I understand. Go, she said. I will watch him. I have posted a security alert on his file. No visitors without ID. If Mark Hughes calls, he gets routed to me, and I'm very good at being unavailable. I turned and walked toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the cold air hit me again. It was daylight now, a bright, blinding white Christmas morning. I walked to my car, my boots crunching on the salted pavement. I took my phone out. I had one missed call. It was from Dad. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the red button. I didn't decline it. I just let it ring until it went to voicemail. I was not ready to talk to him. Not yet. I needed ammunition first. I got into the car and drove. The roads were clearer now, the plows having done their work. I drove past the cheery Christmas displays, past the families walking in matching pajamas, past the joy that felt like it belonged to a different species. I was going back to the house on Oak Street. I was going to tear it apart. I was going to find the thermostat logs. I was going to find the bank statements. And I was going to find whatever Grandma Evelyn had hidden in a tin box. Camille was right. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a hostage extraction, and I was the only one who could breach the perimeter. As I turned onto the street, I saw Mrs. Landry, the next-door neighbor, sweeping snow off her porch. She stopped and watched my car slow down. She looked worried. I parked in the driveway. The house loomed over me, dark and silent. It looked like a tomb. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence was deafening. Okay, Grandma, I whispered into the freezing air. Tell me where you hid it. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves I had swiped from the hospital supply cart. I wasn't a daughter visiting for the holidays anymore. I was an investigator executing a warrant, and I wasn't leaving until I found the smoking gun. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the camera icon. I switched it to video mode, checked the battery life, 82%, and hit the red record button. "It is December 25th, 2025, I said clearly, my voice bouncing off the bare walls of the entryway. Time is 8:14 in the morning. I am at 12 Oak Street, Hollow Ridge. This is Kylie Hughes recording the condition of the residence of Harold Hughes." I held the phone steady at chest height, turning slowly to capture a 360-degree view of the foyer. The house was a tomb. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, the kind of silence that settles when a home has been stripped of its pulse. "Living room," I narrated, walking forward. The floorboards creaked loudly in the cold air. I panned the camera across the space. Usually, at this time of year, this room would be an explosion of red and green. Grandma Evelyn had boxes of ornaments dating back to 1950, but the room was gray. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the bright Christmas morning sun. The furniture was pushed back against the walls, creating a wide, empty lane in the center of the rug. No holiday decorations, I noted for the recording. No obstructions, curtains drawn. I walked to the thermostat in the hallway. This was the first critical piece of evidence. I held the camera close to the digital display. "Current interior temperature is 52 degrees, I read. "Target temperature is set to 50. I did not touch the dial yet. Instead, I pressed the menu button on the side of the interface, navigating to the history log. I was grateful my father had installed a smart thermostat 2 years ago, bragging about how much money it would save. He didn't realize it created a digital footprint of his cruelty. "Accessing history," I said. "System logs show the heat was lowered to 50 degrees on December 20th at 6 p.m. It has not been adjusted since 5 days. They had lowered the heat 5 days ago." I scrolled further back. "Schedule settings indicate a permanent hold. There is no daytime increase programmed. The system was manually overridden to stay at 50 degrees indefinitely." I took a screenshot of the log on my own phone, then went back to recording the video. "Thermostat is functional. The furnace is not broken." This was a manual setting. I moved into the kitchen. The air here was even colder, the tile floor acting as a conductor for the freeze coming up from the basement. I walked to the island where the note still sat under the salt shaker. I zoomed in. I did not touch the paper. If this went to court, Mark would claim I planted it or wrote it myself. I needed to document it in situ. "Note found on kitchen island," I said. Handwriting matches Diane Hughes. Text reads, "We went on a cruise. You handle Grandpa. No date, no contact info." I circled the island, filming the note from multiple angles to show it hadn't been moved. Then I turned to the refrigerator. "Checking food supply," I said. I yanked the door open. The light flickered on. The shelves were stocked, but it was a performance of abundance, not actual sustenance for an elderly man. There were 3 bottles of expensive Chardonnay, a block of artisanal cheddar that was hard as a rock, a jar of gourmet olives, a container of leftover pasta with shrimp that had started to grow a fuzzy gray mold. I scanned the shelves for the things Grandpa actually ate, the soft puddings, the applesauce, the protein shakes. "No soft foods," I narrated. "No prepared meals, no high-calorie supplements." I opened the freezer. It was packed with raw steaks and bags of frozen kale, things a man with dentures and arthritis could not cook or chew. "The food present is unsuitable for the residents' dietary needs," I stated flatly. I closed the fridge and walked to the cabinet where the medications were kept. I opened it. It was a disaster. Usually, Grandma had a system, a plastic organizer labeled with days of the week. Now, there were just orange bottles scattered on the shelf. I picked one up with my gloved hand, turning the label to the camera. "Lisinopril. Prescription date is November 1st. Bottle should be empty. It is half full." I shook it, the pills rattling like dry bones. "Medication non-compliance. No organization system present." I moved toward the back of the house, to the sunroom. My heart rate spiked as I approached the door. my body remembering the image of him curled on the floor from the night before. Entering the room where the patient was found, I said. The door was pulled almost shut. I nudged it open with my foot. The room was flooded with light now, which only made it look more desolate. I filmed the mattress on the floor. Stained mattress, I said. No sheets, no pillows, no blankets. I walked to the wall outlet near the mattress. Outlet is empty, no space heater, no lamp. I panned to the small bedside table. No water pitcher within reach, no telephone. I walked to the windows. They were single-pane glass, old and drafty. I put my hand near the frame, showing the camera how the curtains fluttered slightly from the draft. Poor insulation, I noted. This is the coldest room in the house. The door to the main house was closed, effectively cutting off airflow from the rest of the dwelling. I stopped recording. I had the physical scene. Now I needed the motive. I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the stack of mail on the counter. My father was meticulous about appearances, but he was lazy about the details he thought no one would see. The junk drawer was his filing cabinet. I pulled the drawer open. It was jammed with takeout menus, rubber bands, and envelopes. I started sifting. "Come on," I muttered. "Where is it?" I found a stack of unopened envelopes rubber-banded together. I snapped the band and started flipping through them. Final notice: electric, past due, water, collection agency, medical bill. I frowned. Grandpa had a pension. He had Social Security. The house was paid off decades ago. There was no reason for these bills to be unpaid unless the money was going somewhere else. Then I saw it. A thick envelope from the bank. Opened and shoved to the back of the drawer. I pulled it out. It was a credit card statement for a joint account. Harold and Mark Hughes. I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the transaction list. Liquor store, $200, golf pro shop, $450, airline tickets, $1,200, and there, at the bottom, a charge dated December 10th, Royal Horizon Cruise Lines. Payment, amount, $5,480. I felt the blood roar in my ears. I laid the statement on the counter next to the cruise note. I framed the shot perfectly. Payment for the cruise was made using the joint account, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Funds were withdrawn from Harold Hughes's assets to pay for the vacation of the caregivers who abandoned him. Click, photo taken. This wasn't just negligence anymore. This was theft. Grand larceny. I shoved the statement into my bag. I took the overdue bills, too. I needed to build a timeline of when the financial bleeding started. I needed air. The house felt contaminated. I walked out the front door, locking it behind me. The cold air felt clean compared to the stagnant atmosphere inside. I saw Mrs. Landry still on her porch, knocking snow off a planter. She looked up and waved tentatively. She was a woman in her 70s who spent most of her day watching the street from her front window. She was the neighborhood historian. I walked over to the fence that separated our properties. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Landry," I said. "Oh, Kylie," she said, clutching her broom. "I saw the ambulance last night. I was so worried. Is Harold okay?" "He is alive," I said carefully. "He is at the hospital." "Oh, thank heavens," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I told my husband, something isn't right over there. It has been so dark." "Did you see my parents leave?" I asked. Mrs. Landry nodded vigorously. "Oh, yes. It was, let me think, Tuesday morning? No, Wednesday, early, around 6. Did they say anything?" "I was getting the paper," she said. Mark was loading the suitcases, big ones, 2 of them, and Diane was laughing. She was wearing that big sun hat she likes. I asked if they were going somewhere nice. What did they say? Diane said, "Finally a break. We are escaping to the sun." Mrs. Landry frowned. She looked so happy, like a weight was off her shoulders. Mark said, "Don't worry about the house. Everything is shut down tight. Everything is shut down tight." "Did you see Grandpa?" I asked. Mrs. Landry's face fell. She looked down at the snow. No, not that day. She hesitated. She looked at me, then at the house, then back at me. Kylie, honey, I probably should have called you, or called someone, but I didn't want to cause trouble. What is it? I asked, leaning over the fence. Please, tell me. It was about 2 weeks ago, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I was in my kitchen. You know my window faces the back of your house? The sunroom? I nodded. I heard a noise. Tap, 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 like a bird hitting the glass. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter. I looked out, and I saw Harold. He was pressing his face against the glass of the sunroom door. He looked confused. He was tapping on the pane. He saw me. I think he mouthed something. What did he say? I asked, gripping the frozen metal of the fence. I couldn't hear him, she said, but he looked like he was calling a name, maybe Evelyn, or help? I don't know. But then, she paused, looking uncomfortable. Then what, Mrs. Landry? Then the curtains swooshed shut, she said. Mark, I saw Mark's arm. He yanked the curtains closed from the inside. Just aggressive, you know? And the tapping stopped. I felt sick, physically sick. Did you see him after that? No, she said. I asked Mark the next day when he was getting the mail. I asked how Harold was. He told me Harold was having episodes and needed quiet time. He said he was being difficult. She looked at me with watery eyes. I believed him, Kylie. Mark always seemed so responsible. It is not your fault, I said, though a part of me wanted to scream at her for not calling the police right then. You couldn't have known. Is there anything I can do? She asked. Yes, I said. I need you to write down exactly what you just told me. The tapping, Mark closing the curtains, the date and time, if you can remember, and what they said when they left with the suitcases. Write it down? She asked, looking nervous. For the doctors, I lied. So they can understand his medical history. She nodded, relieved. Okay, I can do that. I keep a diary. You know, I can check the dates. Thank you. Mrs. Landry. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and just breathed for a moment, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup, which I had left in the console. Tap, tap, tap. Grandpa had tried to signal for help. He had tried to get someone's attention, and my father had literally pulled the curtain on him. I looked at the house again. I had the video. I had the thermostat logs. I had the cruise receipt paid for with Grandpa's money. And now I had a witness who saw Mark actively concealing Grandpa from the world. But I still didn't have the one thing Grandpa had whispered about. The papers, the box. I looked at the second-floor window, my old bedroom, and next to it, the sewing room, Grandma Evelyn's sanctuary. If there was a secret, it was in that room. I started the car to warm up my hands. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. I needed to find the cash, and I needed to find it before Mark and Diane uploaded their first vacation mode selfie. I stood in the center of the hallway, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. The air was still frigid, but the cold felt different now. It was no longer the biting chill of neglect. It was the sharp, clarifying cold of a crime scene. I had the video evidence of the thermostat. I had the neighbor's testimony about the window. I had the bank statement proving they paid for a luxury cruise with the money meant for Grandpa's care. But I needed the final piece. I needed the thing Grandpa had used his last ounce of strength to tell me about. They do not know about your grandma. The papers. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Grandma Evelyn. I thought about where she spent her time. Mark and Diane had taken over the living room with their massive television and their modern leather sectional that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. They had colonized the kitchen with their espresso machine and wine fridge. But there was one room they never used, the sitting room. It was a small alcove off the library, a space that was too small for a television and too dark for my mother's Instagram photos. It was where Grandma used to sit in the evenings. reading or mending clothes while Grandpa listened to the radio. I walked toward the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. The handle was cold brass, worn smooth by decades of use. I turned it and pushed. The door groaned on dry hinges, a sound that seemed to protest the intrusion. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me instantly. The rest of the house smelled like stale air and cleaning chemicals, the scent of people trying to scrub away the past. But this room smelled like vanilla pipe tobacco, old paper, and lavender. It smelled like 1995. It smelled like safety. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom. My parents had used this room as a dumping ground for clutter. There were stacks of magazines, boxes of old holiday decorations, and piles of clothes meant for donation that never made it to the charity shop. But underneath the debris, the bones of the room were exactly as she had left them. Her wingback chair was there, the velvet fabric worn bald on the armrests. Her sewing table was pushed into the corner, covered in a layer of dust. The bookshelves were lined with Reader's Digest condensed novels and photo albums with peeling spines. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered. "Where is it?" I moved to the bookshelf. Grandpa had said the papers. I ran my gloved fingers over the spines of the books. I pulled out a few albums, shaking them to see if anything fell out. Nothing but loose photographs of birthdays from 30 years ago. I saw a picture of myself at 7 years old, blowing out candles while my father stood in the background, looking at his watch. Even then, he was waiting for something else. I put the album back. I looked at the bottom shelf. There, tucked between a history of the Civil War and a book on gardening, was her Bible. It was a massive King James version, bound in cracked black leather, with her name embossed in gold foil that had mostly flaked away. I pulled it out. It was heavy. The pages were edged in gold, soft and thin as onion skin. I carried it to the sewing table and opened it. The spine cracked. I leafed through the pages. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. I stopped at the Book of Psalms. There was a bookmark there, a dried, pressed rose that was so old it looked like brown tissue paper. But it wasn't marking a prayer. It was marking a thick, cream-colored envelope. My breath hitched. The envelope was sealed, but the glue had dried out and popped open years ago. On the front, in Grandma's perfect, looping cursive, were the words, "Kylie, read only if something feels wrong." I felt a shiver slide down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She knew. She had known years ago. I pulled the letter out. The paper was crisp, high-quality stationery. "My dearest Kylie, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and your grandfather is alone. And if you have found this, it means you are worried. Trust that worry. I love your father. He is my son. But I know him. I know that he sees the world in terms of what he is owed, not what he can give. He has always had a hole in his hand where money is concerned, and your mother, God bless her, has a hunger for things that shine. When I got sick, Mark started talking about consolidating assets. He brought papers for us to sign. He said it would make things easier for tax purposes. He said he wanted to protect the house. I did not sign them. Kylie, and I made sure your grandfather did not sign them either. Mark thinks he did. He thinks he holds the title to this house and the power over our accounts. But the papers he has are drafts. They are notarized, yes, but they were never filed with the county. I switched them. I gasped aloud in the empty room. I went to a lawyer in the city, a man named Jonah Pike. He helped me set up a trust that activates the moment I die. The house does not belong to Mark. It belongs to the Evelyn Hughes Living Trust, and the beneficiary is Harold Hughes for his lifetime. Upon his death, it passes to you. Mark has been paying himself a management fee from our savings because I let him believe he was in charge. It was the price of peace. But if he has stopped caring for your grandfather, the peace is over. Go to the tin box, the one with the blue flowers where I kept the buttons. Mark will never look inside it because he thinks it is just trash. He sees no value in mending things. The truth is in the box. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. She had played the long game. She had known that her son would eventually turn on them, and she had built a trap door. I looked around the room frantically. The tin box. I knew exactly the one she meant. It was an old Danish cookie tin, blue with white flowers, that had sat on her sewing table for as long as I could remember. I looked at the table. It wasn't there. Panic surged in my chest. Had they thrown it out? Had they finally cleared out the junk? I started tearing through the piles of clutter my parents had dumped in the room. I shoved aside a box of old curtains. I kicked over a stack of magazines. "Come on," I hissed. "Where is it?" I pulled open the drawers of the sewing table. Thread, needles, a pair of heavy fabric scissors. No box. I turned to the closet. It was filled with old coats and vacuum cleaner parts. Then I saw it, on the top shelf, pushed all the way to the back behind a broken humidifier, was the blue tin. I grabbed the shelf and pulled myself up, stretching to reach it. My fingers brushed the cold metal. I hooked it and pulled it down. It clattered onto the floor, the lid popping off. Hundreds of buttons spilled out. Red buttons, white buttons, brass buttons, pearl buttons. They scattered across the wooden floor like hail. But underneath the buttons, sitting at the bottom of the tin, was a thick packet of documents tied with a piece of butcher's twine. I sat down on the floor, ignoring the cold, and untied the knot. The first document was a heavy, legal-sized paper, deed of trust. I scanned the text, my eyes jumping over the legalese until I found the names. Grantor, Evelyn Hughes. Grantee, the Evelyn Hughes Living Trust. Trustee, Jonah Pike. Escrow. I flipped the page. Terms of occupancy. Mark Hughes and Diane Hughes are granted tenancy at will, revocable at any time by the trustee, provided they serve as primary caregivers to Harold Hughes. Failure to provide adequate care, including medical, nutritional, and environmental standards, constitutes a breach of tenancy and immediate eviction. I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound that startled me. They were tenants. My parents were not the lords of the manor. They were tenants on probation. And they had just violated every single term of their lease. I flipped to the next document. It was a photocopy of a bank ledger, annotated in Grandma's handwriting. Transfer to M. Hughes, $2,000, July. Transfer to M. Hughes, $2,000, August. Next to the August entry, she had written, "Mark says he needs this for the roof. The roof is fine." There was a business card clipped to the back of the stack. Jonah Pike, Pike and Hollow Legal Services, 555, Main Street, Suite 4. I looked at the documents spread out on the floor around me. The buttons glittered in the beam of my flashlight like jewels. Mark and Diane had walked past this box every single day. They had probably moved it to dust. They had probably complained about it being clutter. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so sure that they were the smartest people in the room, that they never thought to look inside a cookie tin. To them, it was just old lady junk. To Grandma, it was a weapon. I gathered the papers carefully, treating them like holy scripture. I put them back in the envelope, then put the envelope in my bag. I didn't put the buttons back. I left them scattered on the floor. Let them see the mess. Let them wonder what was missing. I stood up, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was power. For the last 4 years, I had walked on eggshells around my parents. I had swallowed their insults. I had let them gaslight me about Grandpa's condition because I thought they held all the cards. I thought if I pushed too hard, they would cut me off from him completely. But they held nothing. They were standing on a trap door, and I had just found the lever. I looked at the time on my phone. 9:30 in the morning. I needed to call Jonah Pike. Even though it was Christmas, I had a feeling a man who helped Evelyn Hughes plan this level of revenge would want to know that the trap had finally been sprung. I walked out of the sitting room, closing the door softly behind me. I went back to the kitchen. I looked at the note one last time. "We went on a cruise. You handle Grandpa." "Oh, I am handling him, Mom," I said to the empty room. "And I'm going to handle you, too." I took out my phone and dialed the number on the business card. It rang 4 times. A voicemail picked up. It was a gruff, deep voice. "You have reached Jonah Pike. If this is an emergency, press 1. If this is about the Hughes file, press 2. My heart hammered. He knew. He had a dedicated line for this. I pressed 2. "This is Kylie Hughes," I said clearly. "I found the tin box. My parents are on a cruise. My grandfather is in the hospital with hypothermia. I am ready to execute the trust." I hung up. I looked around the freezing kitchen. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was expectant. It was the silence before the storm. I grabbed my bag and walked out the front door, locking it tight. I had the evidence. I had the witness. And now, I had the title. The real revenge wasn't going to be a screaming match. It wasn't going to be a dramatic scene at the dinner table. It was going to be an eviction notice. I sat in my car outside a brownstone building on Main Street. My phone pressed to my ear. It was Christmas morning, a time when the world was supposed to be asleep or unwrapping gifts. But the voice on the other end of the line was wide awake. "Pike and Hollow," a woman's voice answered. She sounded crisp, efficient, and completely unbothered by the holiday. "This is Kylie Hughes," I said, my voice tight. "I left a voicemail for Jonah Pike. I found the tin box." There was a pause, a heavy, pregnant silence that told me everything I needed to know. "Mr. Pike has been expecting this call," she said. Her tone shifted from professional to something almost reverent. "He is in the office. He came in as soon as he saw your number on the caller ID. The side door is unlocked. Come straight up to the second floor." I hung up and stared at the building. It wasn't a glass and steel tower. It was an old brick structure with ivy crawling up the side, the kind of place that looked like it held secrets in the mortar. My grandmother had chosen well. She didn't want a shark in a suit. She wanted a fortress. I grabbed my bag containing the evidence, the video files on my phone, the thermostat screenshots, the cruise receipt, and the packet from the tin box, and stepped out into the biting wind. I pushed open the side door and climbed the narrow wooden stairs. At the top, a door stood open. Jonah Pike was standing behind a massive mahogany desk that looked like it weighed more than my car. He was older than I expected, maybe in his 70s, with shock-white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He was wearing a flannel shirt and suspenders, clearly not dressed for a client meeting, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Kylie," he said. He didn't smile. He just nodded at the leather chair opposite him. "You look like her, around the eyes." "Mr. Pike?" I said, dropping my bag onto the chair. "My grandfather is in the hospital. My parents are on a cruise. And I think they tried to kill him." Jonah didn't gasp. He didn't look shocked. He just pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and put them on. "Sit down," he said calmly, "and tell me everything. Start with the temperature." I sat. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the large monitor on his desk. I walked him through the timeline. "December 20th, 6 p.m., I said, bringing up the screenshot. "Thermostat manually set to 50 degrees, locked, override disabled." Jonah leaned in, studying the image. 50 degrees? That is not a mistake. That is a strategy. I swiped to the next image. The note: "We went on a cruise. You handle Grandpa." "Left on the counter," I said. "No date, no instructions, just abandonment." I showed him the video of the sunroom, the bare mattress, the empty water pitcher, the lack of phone. "He was trapped," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "They cut the phone lines months ago. The neighbor saw him tapping on the glass for help, and my father pulled the curtains shut." Jonah's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. He wrote down the neighbor's name, Mrs. Landry. "Witness testimony is good," he muttered, "but paper is better. Show me what you found in the box." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I handed him the deed of trust and the letter from Grandma Evelyn. Jonah took the documents. He ran a hand over the paper, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Evelyn was a smart woman," he said softly. "She sat right in that chair 4 years ago. She told me." "Jonah, My son loves money more than he loves people. I need you to protect Harold from him." He opened a file cabinet behind him and pulled out a thick, red folder. He laid it on the desk next to my copies. "This is the original," he said. "The Evelyn Hughes Living Trust. Everything you found matches what I have here. The house does not belong to Mark. It never did. The deed is held in the trust. Mark and Diane are listed as tenants at will. Do you know what that means, Kylie?" "It means they can be evicted," I said. "It means more than that," Jonah said, tapping the document with a thick finger. "It means their residency is conditional. It is contingent on the specific performance of care duties for Harold Hughes. Clause 14, Section B." He flipped the page and read aloud. "The tenants shall provide a safe, warm, and habitable environment for the beneficiary. Harold Hughes. Failure to provide medical care, nutrition, or basic utilities shall constitute an immediate breach of this agreement, resulting in the immediate termination of tenancy rights." He looked up at me over his glasses. "They didn't just fail to care for him, they created a hazardous environment, legally speaking. They evicted themselves the moment they turned that dial down to 50. "But they act like they own it," I said. "Dad always talks about my house and my equity. He showed me a power of attorney once. He waved it in my face when I asked about Grandpa's bank accounts." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Did he now? Do you have a copy of that POA?" "No," I said, "but he used it at the bank. I found this." I slid the credit card statement across the desk, the one showing the $5,480 charge to Royal Horizon Cruise Lines. Jonah picked it up. He studied the transaction date. "December 10th, he noted. "Paid in full." He stood up and walked over to a safe in the corner of the office. He spun the dial, left, right, left, and pulled open the heavy steel door. He extracted a single sheet of paper protected by a plastic sleeve. "This," Jonah said, placing it on the desk, "is the only valid durable power of attorney Harold Hughes ever signed. He signed it 4 years ago, right after Evelyn died. Look at the designated agent." I looked at the line. Primary agent, Jonah Pike. Secondary agent, Kylie Hughes. My breath caught in my throat. "Me?" "You," Jonah confirmed. "Evelyn didn't trust Mark, and Harold agreed. He knew Mark would bully him, so he signed this. It states that if Harold is incapacitated, I step in. If I am unavailable or decline, you step in." "But Mark has been managing the money," I said, confused. "The bank let him do it." "Because he likely presented a forged document," Jonah said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Or he bullied a branch manager, or Harold signed something under duress that Mark typed up on his home computer." Jonah pointed to the signature on the document in front of us. It was Grandpa's signature, shaky but distinct, with a specific loop on the H. "Does the signature on Mark's paperwork look like this?" I thought back to the few times I had seen Dad signing checks for Grandpa. "No, Dad always just scribbled. He said Grandpa's hand was too shaky, so he helped him." "That is fraud," Jonah said flatly. "And using a fraudulent instrument to access funds to pay for a cruise while leaving the victim to die? That is financial exploitation of an elder. It is a felony." He sat back down and picked up his office phone. "We are going to stop the bleeding right now," he said. "I am calling the bank's fraud department. We are going to freeze every asset attached to Harold's Social Security number. When Mark tries to buy a Mai Tai on that ship, his card is going to decline." "Can we do that on Christmas?" I asked. "Fraud departments don't sleep," Jonah said grimly. He dialed. I listened as he navigated the automated system, his voice commanding and sharp. When he got a human on the line, he didn't ask, he dictated. "This is Jonah Pike, attorney for Harold Hughes. I am reporting unauthorized access and suspicious activity on account ending in 442. I am emailing the affidavit of power of attorney to your secure portal right now. I want a full freeze, no withdrawals, no transfers, and I want a flag on all credit lines." He paused, listening. "Yes, I understand the account holder is currently hospitalized due to criminal neglect. I suggest you expedite this unless you want your bank named as an accessory in the police report." He hung up and looked at me. Done. In 10 minutes, your parents are going to find out they are broke. They are going to be furious, I said. The old fear of my father's temper flared up in my stomach, a childhood reflex I couldn't quite shake. Let them be furious, Jonah said. Fury makes people make mistakes. He looked at the cruise receipt again. This receipt is the nail in the coffin. Kylie, they used his money to fund their escape from the crime scene. It establishes premeditation. They planned the trip. They paid for it with his funds. And they timed the neglect to coincide with their departure. My phone buzzed. It was Camille Ward from the hospital. Answer it, Jonah said. Put it on speaker. I tapped the screen. Camille? I am with a lawyer, Jonah Pike. Good. Camille's voice came through, tinny but clear. I just got off the phone with the attending physician. Harold is stabilizing, but we have a new problem. The hospital administration is pushing for a discharge plan. They need the bed. Usually, in these cases, we release to the family. He cannot go back to that house, I said immediately. He won't, Jonah interjected. This is Jonah Pike, Ms. Ward. I am holding the deed to the property and the valid power of attorney. Mark Hughes has no legal standing. I am authorizing you to release Harold Hughes into the custody of Kylie Hughes, pending a temporary housing arrangement. I can work with that, Camille said, sounding relieved. But we need a physical location. I cannot release him to a car. I will take him to a hotel if I have to, I said. No, Jonah said. You take him to the rehabilitation center in Westlake. I know the director. I will make a call. It is secure. It has 24-hour medical staff. And most importantly, it has armed security at the front desk. Mark and Diane won't be able to get past the lobby. That works, Camille said. I will start the transfer paperwork. But Kylie, you need to be prepared. If Mark finds out, he is going to play the concerned son card. He will call the police and say you kidnapped his father. Let him call, Jonah said. We have the thermostat logs. We have the neighbor. We have the video. If he calls the police, he is just turning himself in. Okay, Camille said. I will lock it down on my end. Stay safe. She hung up. Jonah leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. The office felt like a war room now. The air was charged with strategy. Listen to me closely. Kylie, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, almost paternal tone. We have the upper hand, but only if we keep our heads. When your parents get back, and they will come back early once the credit cards stop working, they are going to come at you with everything they have. I know, I said. Gaslighting, guilt. They will cry, Jonah predicted. Your mother will say it was a misunderstanding. She will say you are trying to ruin the family. She will say Grandpa is senile and doesn't know what he is saying. Mark will threaten to sue you for theft of documents. He will threaten to call your employer. He might, I admitted. You need to be a wall, Jonah said. You do not engage. You do not argue. You speak only through paper. When they arrive at the house, you do not let them in. You change the locks today. Can I do that? I asked. Legally? You are the acting agent for the owner, Jonah said. The owner is Harold. The lease for the tenants, your parents, has been breached. You are securing the property to prevent further damage. Yes, you can change the locks. In fact, you must. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a fresh business card. He wrote a number on the back. This is a private security firm I use. Call them. Have a guard posted at the driveway when you change the locks. You need a neutral witness for everything that happens next. If Mark tries to kick down the door, I want it on video, and I want a retired cop standing there to stop him. I took the card. My hand was steady now. Financial guillotine, I said, looking at the frozen account confirmation on his screen. It is the only language they speak, Jonah said. We just cut their vocal cords. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snowy street. Evelyn knew this day would come, he said softly. She sat right there and cried because she knew her son was broken inside. She left this roadmap for you because she knew you were the only one strong enough to follow it. He turned back to me. Go change the locks, Kylie. Go get your grandfather, and when the ship docks, tell them to call me." I stood up, gathering the files. The weight of the evidence felt lighter now, shared with someone who knew how to wield it. "Thank you, Jonah," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he said, sitting back down and picking up his pen. "The real fight starts when they realize the keys don't work." I walked out of the office and back into the cold, but this time I had a plan, I had a team, and I had the law on my side. I got into my car and dialed the number for the locksmith. "I need an emergency rekey," I told the dispatcher. "Entire property, and I need it done within the hour." "On Christmas?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," I said, "and I will pay double." I put the car in gear. I wasn't just investigating a claim anymore. I was foreclosing on my parents' entitlement. The phone in my pocket buzzed against my hip, a vibration that felt like a warning shot. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the thermostat history on my laptop screen, cross-referencing it with the weather report from 5 days ago. I pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with a photo of my mother, Diane. It was a picture from happier times, her face smoothed by filters, smiling over a glass of rosé. I hit accept and put it on speaker. I placed the phone on the marble countertop, right next to the note she had left. "Kylie!" Her voice burst into the freezing room, tinny and distorted by a satellite delay. Behind her voice, I could hear the distinct, hollow roar of wind over a microphone and the faint, steel drum rhythm of a calypso band. "Merry Christmas. Honey, we finally got signal. Is everything okay?" Her tone was bright, manicured, and completely fake. It was the voice she used when she ran into someone she disliked at the grocery store. "Hello, Mom," I said. My voice was flat. I was not a daughter. I was a recording device. "We felt so terrible about leaving," she rushed on, the words tumbling over each other. "But the opportunity just came up, and Mark was so stressed. You know how his back gets. We thought, since you were coming anyway, it would be fine. How is Grandpa?" She didn't ask where Grandpa was. She asked how he was. "He is cold," I said. There was a pause on the line. The steel drums seemed to get louder. "Well, turn up the heat, silly," she laughed, a nervous, trilling sound. "That old furnace is temperamental. Listen, the reason I'm calling, did you go into the study?" The pivot was so fast it almost gave me whiplash. "Why would I go into the study?" I asked. "Oh, no reason," she said, her voice tightening. "Just, Mark left some tax papers out on the desk, sensitive client stuff. He's worried you might move them. You know how you like to clean." "I haven't touched Mark's desk," I said, which was technically true. I had raided Grandma's sewing room, not Mark's office. Good," she breathed. "And the house? Everything looks normal?" "Define normal," I said. "Kylie, don't be difficult," she snapped, the mask slipping for a second. "Just stay out of the drawers. We will be back in a few days. We are having a little issue with the cards, probably just a travel flag, so we might cut it short. Just keep Grandpa fed and don't snoop. Enjoy the buffet, Mom," I said. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of not screaming. She hadn't asked if he was alive. She hadn't asked if he had eaten. She asked about the papers. A second later, a text message pinged. It was from Mark. "Don't touch anything. That is our house. You are a guest. Leave the thermostat alone. It acts up if you mess with it." I didn't reply. I took a screenshot of the text. That is our house. The possessiveness was palpable. He was terrified. He knew exactly what he had done, and he was trying to bully me into silence from 1,000 miles away. Another text came through. An image. It was a close-up photo of the furnace in the basement, with a panel removed and wires hanging loose. Mark's text followed. "Proof: the igniter is shot. Broken before we left. Parts on order. Don't let Grandpa freeze. Use the space heaters." I stared at the photo. Use the space heaters. The space heaters that weren't there. The space heaters he had removed. I tapped the photo and selected File Info on my phone. The metadata popped up. Date, taken, July 14th, 2025. Time, 2:45 p.m. I laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. He had sent me a picture from 5 months ago, probably when they had the system serviced for the summer. He was trying to gaslight me with a digital paper trail, but he was sloppy. I saved the photo and the metadata readout to my evidence folder. Attempt to deceive investigator regarding timeline of negligence. I needed to cement the timeline. I needed to prove the heat was turned down, not broken. I grabbed my coat and walked out the side door. Crossing the yard to Mrs. Landry's fence. The snow was deep, coming up to my calves. Mrs. Landry answered her door on the first knock. She looked terrified, clutching a tea towel. "Kylie," she whispered. "I saw the locksmith truck earlier. Is everything all right?" "I need a favor." "Mrs. Landry," I said. "You have a Ring doorbell camera, right?" "Yes," she said. "My son installed it last year." "Does it record audio?" "It does," she nodded. "It picks up everything, even the squirrels." "I need to see the footage from the morning my parents left," I said. "December 20th, around 6 a.m. Mrs. Landry ushered me inside. Her house was warm, smelling of yeast rolls and ham. It was a painful contrast to the icebox next door. We sat at her kitchen table, and she pulled up the app on her iPad. She scrolled back. December 20th, 5:58 a.m. I watched the screen. The front door of my grandfather's house opened. Mark came out first, dragging 2 large suitcases. He looked healthy, strong. He wasn't limping. He walked to the car, popped the trunk, and heaved the bags in. Then he walked back to the front door. He stood on the porch for a moment. "Wait," I said. "Turn up the volume, Mrs." Landry tapped the screen. On the video, Mark leaned into the house. He shouted something over his shoulder. "I am locking it at 50. Diane, that should keep the pipes from bursting, but I am not paying to heat an empty house." My stomach dropped. Empty house. He wasn't just neglecting Grandpa. He was erasing him. In Mark's mind, the house was already empty. Grandpa was just furniture he had covered with a sheet. Diane's voice drifted out from inside the hallway. "Just hurry up. We are going to miss the shuttle." Mark slammed the door. He locked it. He checked the handle. Then he jogged to the car, whistling. "Can you send me that clip?" I asked Mrs. Landry. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Of course," she said. Her hand shook as she hit the share button. "Oh, Kylie," he said. "Empty house." "I know," I said. "Thank you. Mrs. Landry, you just saved his life." I walked back to the house with the video file burning a hole in my pocket. My phone rang again. It was Camille Ward. "Bad news," Camille said. She sounded out of breath. "I just got an alert from the Port Authority logs. The Royal Horizon ship is docking in Miami tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. They are cutting the itinerary short due to a mechanical issue with the ship's propulsion. They will be on a flight by noon," I calculated. "They could be here by tomorrow night." "You have 24 hours, Camille said. "Maybe less. I have the discharge papers ready for Harold. The rehab center is expecting him at 4 p.m. today. Get him out of there. Kylie." "I am going to the hospital now," I said. "But first, I have to set the stage." "What stage?" "The welcome home party," I said grimly. I hung up and walked into the dining room. I cleared the table. I didn't set it for dinner. I set it for a deposition. I laid out the timeline. On the left, the text from Mark claiming the furnace was broken. Next to the metadata proving the photo was 5 months old. In the center, the transcript of Mrs. Landry's video, where he admitted to locking the thermostat at 50 degrees. On the right, the cruise receipt paid for with Grandpa's money, and the bank statement showing the transfers, and in the middle, sitting on a small wooden stand, was the blue tin box. It wasn't a family dining room anymore. It was a courtroom. I called the agency Jonah Pike had recommended. I needed a witness, not just a security guard, but a medical professional who could testify to the condition of the house and the patient's needs. I need a registered nurse for a private duty assignment, I told the dispatcher. Immediate start. Her role is observation and documentation. She needs to be prepared to testify in a probate hearing. We have someone, the dispatcher said. Nurse Sierra Blake. She specializes in elder abuse cases. She is tough as nails. She can be there in an hour. Send her, I said. I drove to the hospital. The roads were slick, the afternoon sun glaring off the ice. Grandpa was sitting up in bed when I arrived. He looked better. He had eaten some broth, but his eyes were hard. The fog of the sedatives had lifted, and beneath it, the old man was furious. They tried to kill me, Kylie, he said. It wasn't a question. I know, Grandpa. I pulled the clipboard out of my bag. It was the temporary medical proxy form Jonah had emailed me. I need you to sign this, I said. It tells the doctors that Mark and Diane are not allowed to see you. It tells them that I am the only one who makes decisions until we get to court. Grandpa took the pen. His hand trembled, but not from weakness. He signed his name with a flourish. Pressing down so hard the pen tore through the paper slightly. Harold J. Hughes. Where are they? He asked. On a boat, I said. But they are coming back, and when they do, I need you to be safe at the rehab center. I want to see them, he said. No, Grandpa. You don't. I want to see their faces, he insisted, when they realize I am not dead. You will, I promised, but on our terms, not theirs. I helped the orderlies transfer him to the transport van. I watched him drive away toward the Westlake Rehabilitation Center. He was safe. The target was off the board. Now, I just had to wait for the hunters. I went back to the house. Nurse Sierra Blake was waiting in her car in the driveway. She was a tall woman with short, graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. She wore scrubs and a heavy parka. You the granddaughter? She asked, rolling down her window. I am. Show me the battlefield, she said. We walked inside. Sierra took one look at the dining room table, the evidence laid out like surgical instruments, and nodded. You are thorough, she said. I like thorough. I want you to sit in the corner, I said. When they come in, don't say a word. Just record. If they try to touch the papers, stop them. If they try to touch me, stop them. Understood, she said. I brought my own body cam. She tapped a small device clipped to her chest. We waited. The afternoon turned into evening. The house was warm now. I had unlocked the thermostat using the override code I found in the manual online, but the atmosphere was electric. At 7 p.m., my phone rang. It wasn't my parents'. It was a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Hughes? A male voice asked. This is Mr. Henderson from the fraud department at First National Bank. Jonah Pike asked me to call you directly if there was any activity. What is it? I asked, gripping the edge of the table. We just blocked a wire transfer, Henderson said. Attempted 5 minutes ago. Someone tried to move $50,000 from your grandfather's home equity line of credit into an offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. I looked at the clock. 7:05. Who authorized it? I asked, though I knew. The request came from a mobile banking app, Henderson said. The device ID matches Diane Hughes's phone. It was flagged because of the freeze Mr. Pike initiated this morning. My blood ran cold. Diane had called me at 3 p.m. She had been sweet. She had been chatty. And while she was asking me if the house was normal, while she was distracting me with questions about tax papers, she had been tapping away on her screen, trying to drain the last drop of blood from the stone. She knew something was wrong, and her first instinct wasn't to rush home. It was to grab the cash and run. Did it go through? I asked. No, Henderson said. It failed, and because the amount is over $10,000 and involved an offshore entity, it triggered a federal suspicious activity report. We are notifying the FBI. I hung up the phone. I looked at Nurse Sierra. They are not just coming back, I said. They are running, and they are going to come here first to get the passports. I heard a car engine in the driveway. Headlights swept across the drawn curtains. I walked to the window and peeked out. A taxi had just pulled up. Mark and Diane were getting out. They looked tan. They looked panicked. And they were walking fast. "Showtime," I whispered. I walked to the front door and unlocked the deadbolt. I didn't open it. I went back to the dining room and stood at the head of the table. Behind the wall of evidence, the front door handle turned. It opened. Mark Hughes stepped into the hallway, dragging a suitcase, with Diane right behind him. "Why is the heat on?" Mark barked, shaking snow off his coat. "I told you not to touch the thermostat." He looked up and saw me. Then he saw the table. Then he saw Nurse Sierra. He froze. "Welcome home," I said. "We need to talk about the furnace." The front door swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind that smelled of exhaust fumes and melting snow, instantly clashing with the quiet atmosphere I had curated in the dining room. Mark and Diane Hughes stood in the foyer. They looked like creatures from a different planet. Their skin was bronzed, glowing with that specific, expensive tan you can only get from 5 days near the equator. They were wearing matching white linen outfits that were now stained with slush from the driveway. The bright orange luggage tags on their suitcases screamed Royal Horizon Elite Guest in cheerful, holographic font. They were laughing as they entered, a carryover from whatever conversation they had been having in the taxi. Diane was shaking snow off a straw hat that looked ridiculous in the dead of winter. Mark was dragging the heavy bags, grunting with exertion. "God, it is freezing in here," Mark announced, kicking the door shut behind him. "I told you, Diane, that old furnace is barely holding on." He looked up and saw me. The laughter died instantly. It didn't fade. It was severed. I was sitting at the head of the dining room table. I had not turned on the overhead chandelier. Instead, I had placed a single high-lumen work lamp on the table, illuminating the spread of documents like an interrogation room. "Kylie?" Diane said, her voice pitching up into that frantic, confused register she used when she was caught off guard. "What on earth? Why are you sitting in the dark?" "Hello, Mom? Hello, Dad?" I did not stand up. I kept my hands folded on the table, right next to the blue tin box. Mark dropped the handle of his suitcase. The wheels clattered loudly on the hardwood. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the scene. He saw the papers. He saw the lamp. And then he saw Nurse Sierra standing in the shadows of the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, her body cam blinking a slow, steady red light. "Who is that?" Mark demanded, pointing a finger at Sierra. "Who is in my house?" "Grandpa almost died," I said. I let the words hang there. I didn't shout them. I didn't infuse them with the tears I had cried the night before. I delivered them like a verdict. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I watched their faces. I saw the micro-expressions flash across them. Mark's jaw clenched. Anger. Diane's eyes widened. Fear. Neither of them showed surprise. "Don't be dramatic. Kylie," Mark said, stripping off his gloves. He tried to regain control of the room by moving, by making noise. "We told you the furnace was acting up. That is why we asked you to come down, to keep an eye on things." "You asked me to come down 14 hours after you left," I said, "and the furnace is not broken." "You are not a mechanic," Mark scoffed. He started walking toward the table. "You don't know what you are talking about. The igniter is shot. I have parts on order." I reached out and tapped the screenshot of the thermostat history I had printed out. "This is the log from the smart thermostat," I said. "It shows a manual adjustment on December 20th at 6 in the morning. The target temperature was set to 50 degrees, and then the system was locked with a passcode." Mark stopped walking. "I also have the video," I continued. Sliding the tablet forward, I pressed play. Mrs. Landry's Ring camera footage played in the quiet room. Mark's voice, tinny but unmistakable, cut through the air. "I am locking it at 50. Diane, that should keep the pipes from bursting. But I am not paying to heat an empty house." Mark stared at the screen. His tan seemed to gray slightly. "You were spying on us?" Diane shrieked. She dropped her purse. "You come into our home, while we are trying to get a well-deserved break, and you spy on your parents? With the neighbor?" I was gathering evidence, I said. Evidence? Diane laughed, a brittle scattered sound. Kylie, honey, you have been working that insurance job too long. You are seeing conspiracies everywhere. We turned it down to save money. We didn't know it would get this cold. It was a mistake, an honest mistake. And the phone? I asked. Was cutting the phone line a mistake? Was taking the blankets a mistake? He wets the bed, Diane shouted, her face twisting into ugliness. Do you have any idea how hard it is? Washing those heavy quilts every day? We took them away to keep them clean until he learned to use the bathroom like an adult. He is 90, I said coldly. He was freezing. He wasn't incontinent. Mom, he was dying of hypothermia. When I found him, his core temperature was 84 degrees. The doctors said another hour and he would have been dead. But he is okay, right? Mark interrupted. He looked at Nurse Sierra, then back at me. He is fine. You are blowing this out of proportion to make us look bad. Where is he? Is he in his room? Mark started to move toward the hallway leading to the back room. He is not here, I said. Mark spun around. What do you mean, he's not here? Did you take him? That is kidnapping. Kylie. He is in a secure medical facility, I said. Under guard. Mark's face turned a violent shade of red. He marched up to the table, looming over me. He was used to this dynamic. He was big. He was loud. And he was my father. He expected me to shrink. You have no right, he spat. I am his legal guardian. I have the power of attorney. You are going to tell me where he is, and then you are going to get out of my house. He reached for the stack of papers on the table. The timeline, the logs, the metadata. Don't, I said. He grabbed them anyway. He crumpled the thermostat log in his fist. I am throwing this trash away, he snarled. And you are leaving. Those are copies, I said, my voice not wavering an inch. The originals are with Jonah Pike. And the digital files are already uploaded to the cloud and sent to the district attorney's office. Mark froze. The crumpled paper in his hand suddenly seemed to burn him. Jonah Pike? He whispered. That is right, I said. Grandma's lawyer. Diane stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears now. She switched tactics instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by a pitiful, trembling victimhood. Kylie, please, she sobbed. Reaching out to touch my arm, I pulled back. You don't understand. We are drowning. The medical bills, the cost of the house. We have been sacrificing everything to take care of him. We just needed a few days. We are human. Why are you trying to destroy us? Sacrificing? I repeated. I picked up the cruise receipt. You spent $5,400 on a Royal Horizon suite, I read from the paper. Paid for on December 10th. We saved for years for that, Diane cried. We scrimped and saved. You paid for it from Grandpa's account, I said. I have the bank transfer records. We paid for everything, Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The lamp rattled. We buy the food, we pay the electric, we handle the maintenance. That money was reimbursement. It was owed to us. Reimbursement for what? I asked. For the food you didn't buy? For the heat you didn't provide? I held up the grocery receipt I had found in the trash earlier. Steaks and expensive wine. Is this what you fed him? I asked. Or was this for you? He is our responsibility, Mark yelled. We manage the finances because he is incompetent. He doesn't know what he has. Actually, I said, leaning forward, he knew exactly what he had. He just couldn't stop you because you drugged him. The room went deadly silent. We gave him something to sleep, Mark muttered, backing away slightly. He gets agitated. It was for his own good. It was a chemical restraint, Nurse Sierra spoke up from the corner. Her voice was calm, professional, and terrifying. Administering unprescribed sedatives to a geriatric patient is a felony assault charge. Mr. Hughes, I have reviewed the toxicology report. Mark looked at Sierra, realizing for the first time that she wasn't just a witness, she was the law in scrubs. Diane's eyes darted to the table. She saw the note. The handwritten note she had left on the counter. "You handle Grandpa." She lunged for it. Her manicured fingers snatched the paper. She ripped it in half, then into quarters, scrunching it into a ball. "There!" she screamed, her voice hysterical. "No note! You are a liar. You wrote that. You are trying to frame us because you want the inheritance." I watched her tear up the paper. I didn't move to stop her. "I took a high-resolution photo of that note 10 hours ago," I said, "and I have a video of it on the counter with today's newspaper next to it for date verification. Tearing it up just adds destruction of evidence to the list of charges." Diane dropped the confetti of paper. She looked at Mark, terrified. "Mark, do something," she whimpered. Mark's face hardened. He was cornered, and like a rat. He was ready to bite. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I am calling the police. You broke into my home. You stole my private documents. You kidnapped my father. I'm going to have you arrested." He pulled out his phone. "Go ahead," I said. "Call them." "You think I won't?" he challenged, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I think you should," I said, "because when they get here, I will show them the deed of trust." I placed the copy of the trust document on the table. "This is not your house, Dad," I said. "It never was." Mark squinted at the paper. "What is that?" "The Evelyn Hughes Living Trust," I explained. "Grandma didn't leave the house to you. She left it to the trust. You are not the owner. You are a tenant." "A tenant at will." "That is a lie," Mark said, his voice shaking. "She told me. She said it was all mine." "She lied to you," I said, "because she knew you would do exactly what you did. She knew you would try to sell it or leverage it the second she was gone. So she protected it." I pointed to the highlighted paragraph. Clause 14. Tenancy is revoked immediately upon failure to provide care. You evicted yourself. Mark, you don't live here anymore. "I have lived here for 4 years, Mark screamed. "This is my home." "Not anymore," I said. "I spoke to Jonah Pike. He is the trustee. He has formally terminated your lease effective immediately due to breach of contract and criminal negligence. You are trespassing." Mark stared at me. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked like he was about to lunge across the table and strangle me. "I will sue you," he hissed. "I will drag you through court until you have nothing. You think you can take this from me? I am his son." "And I am his granddaughter," I said. "And unlike you, I didn't leave him to die." Mark took a step toward me. Nurse Sierra uncrossed her arms and stepped into the light. "Sir," she said sharply, "back up." Mark ignored her. He was fixated on me. "You ungrateful little witch," he growled. "I should have—" The front door opened again. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. We all turned. 2 large men in EMT uniforms stood in the doorway. Between them, supporting himself on a walker but standing upright, was Grandpa Harold. He was wearing a thick wool coat and a new scarf I had bought him at the hospital gift shop. He looked frail. Yes, his face was still thin, and his movements were slow, but his eyes were clear. The drugs were out of his system. "Dad?" Mark whispered. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Diane gasped, covering her mouth. "Harold?" Grandpa shuffled forward. The EMTs moved with him, ready to catch him, but he waved them off. He walked past the luggage. He walked past the melting snow on the floor. He stopped at the end of the dining room table. He looked at the documents spread out. Then he looked at Mark. "You look tan, son," Grandpa said. His voice was raspy, but it carried across the room. "Dad, listen," Mark started, his voice trembling. "She is lying. Kylie is lying. We didn't know the heat was off. We would never—" "I heard you," Grandpa said. Mark froze. "What?" "I was awake," Grandpa said. "When you left, I heard you tell Diane you were locking the thermostat. I heard you say, 'Empty house.'" Mark's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I tapped on the window, Grandpa said, looking at the floor and then back up at Mark. 2 weeks ago, you saw me. You pulled the curtain. Dad, I didn't. Mark stammered. Grandpa reached into his pocket. He pulled out his left hand. It was shaking, but he held it up for Mark to see. He pointed to the ring finger. The raw red skin where his wedding band used to be was stark against the pale flesh. Where is it, Mark? Grandpa asked. Mark looked at the hand, then at the floor. I put it in the safe. For safekeeping. It was loose. I didn't want you to lose it. You sold it, Grandpa said. Or you tried to? No, never, Mark cried. It doesn't matter, Grandpa said. He took a deep breath, steadying himself on the walker. He looked at Diane, who was sobbing quietly into her hands, and then he looked straight into Mark's eyes. For 4 years, you told me I was a burden, Grandpa said. You told me I was broke. You told me I had nothing left but your charity. He straightened his spine. It was a subtle movement, but it made him look 6 inches taller. I built this house, Grandpa said. I built the table you are standing at, and I built the life you have been leeching off of. Dad, please, Mark begged. We are family. Grandpa looked at me. He offered me a small, tired smile. Then he turned back to his son. I am not your asset, Mark, he said. The words landed like stones. And you are not my family. Grandpa finished. Not anymore. He turned to the EMTs. I am ready to go now. Wait, Diane screamed, lunging forward. Where are you going? You can't leave us. Nurse Sierra stepped in front of her, blocking her path with a solid wall of blue scrubs. Step back, ma'am, Sierra said. Mark stood paralyzed as the EMTs helped Grandpa turn around. You can't do this, Mark yelled at me. Where are you taking him? I gathered up the files. I put the blue tin box into my bag. He is going to rehab, I said, and then he is coming to live near me. I walked to the door. Stopping right next to Mark, I could smell the fear on him now, sour and sharp beneath the expensive cologne. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, I said quietly. Jonah Pike is filing the eviction order tomorrow morning. If you are still here, the sheriff will remove you. I have nowhere to go, Mark whispered. The arrogance was gone. He sounded like a child. You have a credit card, I said. Oh, wait, no, you don't. We froze that too. I stepped out onto the porch into the cold night air. The wind felt good. It felt clean. I walked Grandpa to the transport van. I got into my car, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't look back at the house on Oak Street with dread. I looked at it with the satisfaction of a job finished. But it wasn't quite over. I had one more stop to make. The conference room at Hollow Ridge Family Services smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and cheap brewing coffee, a scent that I would forever associate with the dismantling of my family. It was December 27th. Outside, the world was moving on from Christmas, returning store-bought sweaters and eating leftovers. Inside room 3B, we were preparing for war. Camille Ward sat at the head of the oval table. She looked tired but focused, her navy blazer replaced by a soft cardigan, though her authority remained absolute. To her right sat the opposition, Mark and Diane Hughes. They looked haggard. The tropical tan from the cruise now looked yellowish under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the arrogance from the night before had curdled into defensive sullenness. To her left sat our team, me, Jonah Pike, Nurse Sierra Blake, and Grandpa. Grandpa sat in his wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket I had brought from my apartment. He was quiet, his hands folded in his lap, staring at a spot on the wall. He looked like a judge waiting for the bailiff to call the court to order. This is a mediation session, Camille began, her voice level. It is not a trial. However, given the gravity of the allegations and the involvement of Adult Protective Services, everything said here is being recorded and transcribed. The goal today is to establish immediate safety protocols for Harold Hughes and to determine the next legal steps regarding his care and assets. She looked at Mark. Mr. Hughes, You requested this mediation before we proceeded with the emergency guardianship hearing. We are listening. Mark straightened his tie. He had regained some of his bluster overnight. He believed in his ability to talk his way out of anything, a skill he had used on tax auditors and credit card companies for 30 years. We just want to clear up this misunderstanding, Mark said, flashing a tight, practiced smile. My daughter has painted a very ugly picture, but the reality is much more complex. Caregiving is stressful. We made mistakes, yes, but we are the legal guardians. We have the authority to make decisions for my father, even if Kylie disagrees with them. Jonah Pike leaned forward. He didn't smile. He placed a thick binder on the table with a heavy thud. Let us review that authority, Jonah said. He opened the binder. Exhibit A, the timeline of the last 7 days. Jonah laid out the photos I had taken, the thermostat locked at 50 degrees, the note on the counter, the empty fridge, the dry water pitcher. This is not a mistake, Mark, Jonah said, his voice deep and gravelly. This is a systemic failure of duty. You left a 90-year-old man without heat, food, or communication for 5 days while you went on a luxury vacation. The furnace broke, Mark insisted, leaning over the table. I told you. Parts are on order. Jonah flipped a page. Exhibit B, the metadata from the photo you sent Kylie, proving the broken furnace picture was taken in July, and the video footage from the neighbor's doorbell camera where you explicitly stated, and I quote, I am locking it at 50. I am not paying to heat an empty house. Mark flinched. Diane looked down at her hands, twisting a diamond ring that I suspected had been bought with Grandpa's pension. You treated him as an expense to be minimized, Jonah continued. Not a human being. We have rights, Mark snapped. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. He slapped it onto the table. I have a durable power of attorney, signed by Harold Hughes on January 15th, 2023. It gives me full control over his medical and financial decisions. It overrides whatever nonsense Kylie is trying to pull. I looked at the document. It was a photocopy. The paper looked worn. Jonah didn't even blink. He picked up the paper, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated. January 15th, 2023. Jonah read. Interesting date. He turned to Nurse Sierra. Ms. Blake, you have reviewed Harold's medical history. Can you tell us where Harold was on that date? Sierra opened her laptop. She didn't look at Mark. She looked at the screen. On January 14th, 2023, Mr. Hughes was admitted to Lakeview General for a hip replacement surgery. Sierra recited. On the 15th, he was in the post-anesthesia care unit. His chart notes indicate he was heavily sedated on morphine and hydromorphone. He was incoherent and unable to feed himself, let alone read or sign legal documents. Sierra looked up, her eyes locking onto Mark. He lacked the capacity to consent. Any signature obtained on that date is medically impossible to validate as voluntary. Mark's face turned a mottled red. He had a moment of clarity. He knew what he was signing. Did he? Jonah asked. Jonah reached down to his briefcase, a battered leather satchel that looked as old as he was. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a photocopy. It was an original document. The ink blue and fresh, the embossed seal of a notary raised on the page. This, Jonah said, sliding it toward Camille, is the notary journal from my office on that same week. Mark, you came to see me. You asked me to draft a power of attorney for your father. I refused because I knew he was in surgery. You left angry. Jonah pointed to the photocopy Mark had presented. That document you have there? The signature doesn't match Harold's pre-stroke handwriting. And the notary stamp? I checked the commission number. It belongs to a notary in a shipping store 3 towns over who lost his license last year for fraud. The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed, a low drone that sounded like a countdown. You are presenting a forged instrument in a legal mediation, Jonah said softly. That is a felony. Mark, strike 2. Mark snatched the photocopy back, his hands shaking. It was a backup, just in case. He wanted me to have it. Let us talk about what else he wanted you to have, Jonah said. Relentless. Or rather, what you took. Jonah placed a speakerphone in the center of the table and dialed a number. "This is Jonah Pike," he said into the device. "I have Mr. Henderson from First National Bank on the line. Mr. Henderson, you are on speaker in a mediation hearing. Can you confirm the transaction attempt we discussed?" The voice on the phone was clear and crisp. "Yes, Mr. Pike, at 3:14 p.m., yesterday, December 26th, a wire transfer request was initiated from the joint account of Harold and Mark Hughes. The amount was $50,000. The destination was an account at the Cayman National Bank." Diane let out a small squeak. Mark stared at the table. His jaw clenched so hard, I thought his teeth would crack. "Can you confirm the origin of the request?" Jonah asked. The IP address matched a mobile device registered to Diane Hughes. Henderson said, "The request was made while the device was geolocated in the arrival terminal of the Miami International Airport." Jonah hung up the phone. He looked at Diane. "You weren't rushing home to save him. You were rushing to drain the accounts before we could freeze them." Diane burst into tears. It was a theatrical, sobbing breakdown. She buried her face in her hands. "We are broke," she wailed. "You don't understand. The business failed 2 years ago. We lost everything. We have credit card debt up to our eyeballs. We were going to lose the cars. We just needed a bridge loan." "So you stole from your father?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her sobbing. "It is his money," Mark shouted, finally snapping. "He doesn't need it. He sits in a chair all day. He eats oatmeal. What does he need $50,000 for? We are the ones out in the world trying to survive. We are the ones keeping up appearances for this family." "Keeping up appearances," Grandpa said. The sound of his voice stopped the room cold. He hadn't spoken since we sat down. Mark looked at him. "Dad, listen. I was going to pay it back. I swear. It was an investment. I just needed—" "Quiet," Grandpa said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Grandpa turned his wheelchair slightly so he was facing Mark directly. "You said you were managing my affairs," Grandpa said. "You told the neighbors you were managing my care." He leaned forward, his eyes wet but fierce. "You didn't manage me. Mark, you harvested me." I felt the breath leave my lungs. Harvested. It was the most brutal, accurate description I had ever heard. They hadn't treated him like a person. They had treated him like a crop, a resource to be stripped, used, and consumed until there was nothing left but a husk. "You took my dignity," Grandpa said. "You took my home. You took my wife's ring. And you tried to take my life because I was becoming too expensive to keep alive." "No," Mark whispered. "No, Dad." "I am done," Grandpa said. He looked at Camille. "I want them out of my house. Today." Camille nodded. She made a note on her pad. "Based on the evidence presented," Camille said formally, "and the admission of financial distress which creates a motive for exploitation, I am recommending the following binding agreement." She read from her list. 1. Mark and Diane Hughes are to vacate the property at 12 Oak Street by 6 p.m. today. A sheriff's deputy will be present to ensure only personal items are removed. No furniture, no documents, no valuables. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Jonah held up a finger. 2, Camille continued, a permanent restraining order will be filed. You are not to come within 500 feet of Harold Hughes or Kylie Hughes. You are not to contact medical providers or financial institutions. 3, she said, looking at Mark, you will agree to a forensic audit of the last 4 years of finances. Every penny you took that was not for Harold's direct benefit will be categorized as a debt. You will sign a promissory note to repay the estate of Evelyn Hughes. We can't pay that, Diane shrieked. We have nothing. Then we will garnish your future wages, Jonah said calmly, and we will put a lien on any assets you do acquire. You lived like kings on his dime. Now you pay the tab. And if we refuse? Mark challenged, though his voice was weak. If we go to court? If you refuse, Jonah said, leaning back in his chair, I hand that forged power of attorney and the bank fraud affidavit to the district attorney. You won't just be evicted, Mark. You will be indicted. Elder abuse, wire fraud, forgery, attempted manslaughter by negligence. Do you want to roll the dice? Mark looked at Jonah. Then he looked at me. He saw no mercy in my eyes. He slumped in his chair, defeated. Fine, he muttered. We will sign. Camille pushed the papers across the table. The sound of the pen scratching on the paper was the only noise in the room. Mark signed. Diane signed, her tears leaving wet spots on the page. It was over. We had won. But as Mark stood up to leave, he paused behind his chair. He looked at me, his eyes cold and venomous. He leaned in close, so only I and Jonah could hear. You think you are so smart, he whispered, but you can't prove intent. You can prove we were sloppy. You can prove we were broke, but you can't prove we wanted him to die. No jury will convict a son for being bad at math. He smirked, a small, nasty victory in the face of defeat. I don't need to prove intent to destroy you, Mark, I said. I just need the truth. The truth is whatever you can prove, Mark said. And you don't have the whole picture. Mom kept secrets too. He turned and walked toward the door, Diane trailing behind him like a ghost. Jonah watched them go. He waited until the door clicked shut. Then he looked at me. His expression was unreadable. He is right about one thing, Jonah said quietly. What? I asked. Intent is hard to prove, Jonah said, unless you have a confession or a smoking gun. We have the thermostat, I said. We have the cruise. That is negligence, Jonah said. Mark is banking on the incompetence defense. Oops, I forgot the heat. Oops, I borrowed some money. He thinks he can dodge prison time. Jonah stood up. He walked to the wall safe in the corner of the conference room. He had brought his own portable lockbox. I realized. But Mark forgot about the one place he couldn't reach, Jonah said. The tin box? I asked. No, Jonah said. The tin box was the breadcrumb trail. It led to me. But Evelyn, she was thorough. She knew Mark might find the tin box, so she left one final failsafe. He looked at Grandpa. Harold, are you ready to open it? Grandpa nodded slowly. Yes, it is time. Jonah turned to me. There is a safe deposit box at the downtown branch, Jonah said. Not the joint account Mark raided, a separate box, in Harold's name only. Evelyn set it up 3 days before she died. She gave the key to me, and she gave the authorization code to Harold. What is in it? I asked. I don't know, Jonah admitted. Evelyn told me. Open this only if Mark tries to bury us. Well, he tried. Jonah handed me a heavy brass key. Mark thinks he can hide behind bad math and hard times, Jonah said. He thinks we can't prove he planned this from the start. He looked at the door where my parents had just exited. Let's go to the bank. Kylie, I have a feeling your grandmother is about to testify from the grave. I took the key. It was cold in my hand. Mark had whispered that we couldn't prove intent. He was confident. He thought he had scrubbed the crime scene, but he hadn't accounted for Evelyn. Let's go, I said. I wheeled Grandpa out of the room. We weren't just clearing the wreckage anymore. We were digging for the foundation. And I had a feeling that whatever was in that box wasn't just money, it was judgment. The air inside the bank vault was cool and dry, smelling of old dust and circulated money. It was a silence that felt heavier than the one in the mediation room. Because this wasn't about negotiation, this was about history. Jonah Pike stood next to me, his breath hitching slightly as he slid the long brass key into box number 402. He turned it. The lock clicked with a satisfying, mechanical finality. Your grandmother came here alone, Jonah whispered, pulling the metal drawer out of the wall. She took a taxi. She didn't want Mark to know she had left the house. We carried the box to a small private viewing room. Jonah set it on the table. Grandpa sat in his wheelchair, his hands resting on the armrests, his eyes fixed on the gray metal lid. "Open it, Kylie," Grandpa said softly. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no jewels. There were no stacks of cash. Evelyn Hughes knew that money could be spent and jewelry could be pawned. She had left something far more dangerous to people like Mark and Diane. She had left the truth. On top lay a thick envelope sealed with wax. Beneath it was a leather-bound journal and a stack of financial ledgers. I picked up the envelope first. It was labeled, "To be opened only if Harold is in danger." I carefully slit the top. I pulled out a document titled Affidavit of Intent and Fear of Coercion. I started to read, my voice trembling in the small room. I, Evelyn Hughes, being of sound mind, am recording this statement on August 10th, 2021. Over the past 6 months, my son, Mark Hughes, has repeatedly pressured me to sign over the deed to our home and the power of attorney for our retirement accounts. He has become aggressive. He has threatened that if we do not comply, he will cease assisting us with property maintenance. I looked up at Jonah. Mark had claimed he was doing it all out of love. Grandma had documented the blackmail years ago. I continued reading. I fear that upon my death, Mark will attempt to isolate Harold. He has already suggested that Harold is too much work and that a state facility would be cheaper. Mark believes we have millions hidden away. We do not. We have enough to live with dignity, but not enough to fund his lifestyle. I am creating this separate repository to prove that any document Mark produces after my death giving him total control is likely obtained through duress or forgery. She knew, Grandpa whispered, tears sliding down his cheeks. She knew he would come for me. "Keep reading," Jonah said, pointing to the leather journal. "That is the kill shot." I opened the journal. It wasn't a diary. It was a forensic accounting log. But it wasn't in Grandma's handwriting. It was in Mark's. "Why does Mark have a journal in here?" I asked. "He doesn't," Jonah said grimly. "Evelyn found it. Mark left it at the house one weekend, and she made photocopies before he came back for it." She realized what it was. I scanned the pages. It was a ledger of debts, gambling debts, failed business loans, and a detailed plan titled The Bridge Strategy. I read the entry dated 4 years ago. Strategy: move into parents' house to eliminate rent. Siphon monthly pension for debt service. Liquidation of assets to begin immediately post-Evelyn. Estimated timeline to full solvency: 5 years. Harold's life expectancy: 3 to 5 years. Break-even point matches. I felt sick. Physically, violently sick. Mark hadn't just been sloppy. He hadn't just been bad at math or overwhelmed. He had calculated the exact date of Grandpa's death to coincide with his own financial recovery. He was betting on the timeline. He had turned down the heat not to save $50 on gas, but to accelerate the schedule. "He said we couldn't prove intent," I said, my voice turning to ice. "He said no jury would convict a son for being bad at math." "This isn't math," Jonah said, closing the box. "This is premeditated exploitation. This proves he didn't just neglect Harold. He was actively waiting for him to die so he could cash out." We left the bank. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt the heat of a righteous fire. We went straight back to Jonah's office. He didn't call Mark. He called the district attorney. "I have new evidence," Jonah told the prosecutor on the phone. "I am sending over a courier. You are going to want to upgrade those charges from negligence to attempted manslaughter and grand larceny." By the time we got the call back, it was 5 in the afternoon. Mark and Diane were at the house, packing their boxes under the supervision of a sheriff's deputy. Jonah put the call on speaker so Grandpa could hear. It was Mark's lawyer. He sounded frantic. "We want to cut a deal," the lawyer said. "My client had no idea that journal existed. He claims it was just brainstorming." "Brainstorming?" Jonah laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "He executed the plan. Counselor. He moved in. He siphoned the pension. He isolated the victim. And he almost finished the job with the thermostat. We are not negotiating a settlement. We are negotiating how many years he spends in prison unless he signs everything, and I mean everything, over right now." "What do you want?" the lawyer asked. "Full restitution," Jonah said. "Mark and Diane will sign a confession of judgment for every penny stolen, plus interest. They will surrender their rights to any future inheritance. They will agree to a permanent protective order, and they will plead guilty to felony financial exploitation to avoid the manslaughter charge." There was a long silence on the other end. "They will sign," the lawyer whispered. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, but it wasn't the confusing, terrifying paperwork of a hospital admission. It was the precise, surgical paperwork of justice. I watched Grandpa sign the final document. It was the lease for a new apartment. It wasn't in Holleridge. It was in my city, 3 blocks from my apartment. It was in a complex with heated floors, a 24-hour concierge, and a view of the park. "Are you sure about this, Grandpa?" I asked. "The house? You built it." Grandpa put the pen down. He looked at the photo of Grandma I had placed on the table. "A house is just wood and brick." "Kylie," he said. "Mark and Diane. They poisoned the ground. I cannot go back there. I don't want to sit in that sunroom and remember the cold." He took my hand. His grip was strong again. "I want to be where it is warm," he said. "I want to be where I am wanted." "You are wanted," I said. The resolution came swift and hard. Mark and Diane were evicted at 6 in the evening. The sheriff's deputy sent me a photo of the keys on the counter. They left with their clothes and their suitcases. They lost the cars. Repossession agents were waiting at the end of the driveway. They lost their reputation. The Cruz story fell apart the moment the local news picked up the police report about the frozen house. They avoided prison only by agreeing to a restitution plan that would garnish their wages for the rest of their working lives. They were working retail jobs now in a town 3 counties over, living in a small rental. They were not allowed to contact Grandpa. They were not allowed to handle money for anyone else ever again. They were free, technically, but they were in a prison of their own making, a prison of debt and shame. 2 weeks later, I walked into Grandpa's new apartment. It was warm. The thermostat was set to 72 degrees. Sunlight flooded in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon toast filled the air. Nurse Sierra was there, not as a guard this time, but as a friend. She was laughing at a joke Grandpa had just told. "Kylie," Grandpa called out from his recliner. He looked different. He had gained 10 pounds. His color was rosy. He was wearing a thick, cashmere cardigan I had bought him. No more stained undershirts. "Hi, Grandpa," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. I walked over to the bookshelf. In the center, in a place of honor, sat the blue tin box. I opened my bag and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was the torn, crumpled note I had rescued from the floor of the dining room. "We went on a cruise. You handle Grandpa." I smoothed it out. I placed it inside the tin box, right on top of the buttons. I wasn't keeping it to be petty. I wasn't keeping it to be angry. I was keeping it because it was the proof. It was the reminder that when the world tried to tell us we were powerless, we found a way to fight back. We didn't use fists. We didn't use violence. We used the truth. I closed the lid of the tin box. I walked over to Grandpa and sat on the ottoman at his feet. He reached out and patted my cheek. His hand was warm. "You look tired, kiddo," he said gently. "Work keeping you busy?" "A little," I smiled. "But it is good work." He looked around the bright, warm room. He looked at the nurse pouring coffee. He looked at the picture of Grandma on the mantel, watching over us. "You know," he said softly, leaning back into the cushions, "for a long time, I thought family meant you had to endure whatever they did to you. I thought it meant suffering in silence because they are blood." He squeezed my hand. "But I was wrong," he whispered. "Family isn't about whose DNA you share. It is about who hands you a blanket when you are freezing." He smiled, and this time, the smile reached his eyes. "This," he said, gesturing to the warmth around us. "This is what family was supposed to feel like. I squeezed his hand back. Merry Christmas, Grandpa. Merry Christmas, Kylie, he said. A little late, but right on time. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I know it was a heavy ride, but I hope justice tasted as sweet to you as it did to me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far this family reaches. If you enjoyed seeing the truth win, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us push this story out to more people who need to hear it. Stay warm, stay safe, and always read the fine print.